This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A. Welcome to hour number 2 of the Stephen A. Smith Show right here on ESPN Radio. I'll get back to your calls in just a minute, but it is my honor and privilege to have my next guest on the line as we speak. He's a Hall of Famer himself, as far as I'm concerned. He's also one of the elite Major League Baseball insiders and analysts. I'm talking about my colleague, my buddy, the one and only Tim Kurkjian. He's right here with yours truly on the Stephen A. Smith Show. What's up, Tim? Good afternoon, sir.
How are you, Stephen A.?
How are you, buddy? Let's get right to it. Your thoughts about who was elected in Chipper Jones on 410 ballots. Still can't get anybody 100%, but Guerrero, 92.9%, Jim Thome, 89.8%, and Trevor Hoffman. Any issues with those selected at all to the Baseball Hall of Fame yesterday?
None for me, Stephen A. I voted for 10 guys. They were, of course, 4 of the 10 that I voted for. On my unofficial list, Chipper Jones is a top 4 third baseman of all time and a vastly underrated player, I think, over the years. Jim Thome has the 8th most homers ever. He's a top 10 first baseman of all time for me. Trevor Hoffman is a top 6 relief pitcher ever and the second most saves ever to your boy Mariano Rivera.
Yep.
And Vlad Guerrero's 318 average, 449 homers. Those two numbers are matched by 5 guys in the history of baseball, and they might as well be the 5 greatest hitters of all time. That's how special Guerrero was, and I just wish people were as old as me, and they could have seen him as a young man just streaking across the outfield at the old Expos ballpark in Montreal. The way he hit the ball, the way he ran, the way he threw was just breathtaking. And all 4 of those guys belong in the Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame's a better place today than it was 2 days ago.
Why is it that none of these guys can get 100% of the ballots? I mean, who's the largest to this day and age? Tom Seaver, is that correct?
Yeah, and look, Stephen A., this is absurd. And I just refuse to blast the people that I work with on this. But for Willie Mays and Hank Aaron not to be unanimous, then no one should be. No one should be if they're not going to be unanimous. But we have a ballot management issue every year now. I deal with it every year. I have more than 10 Hall of Famers, and I can only vote for 10. So I would never withhold a vote, say, from Chipper Jones, because I know he's getting in order to vote for somebody who might be on the cusp but is 11th on my list. I just can't do that. I don't want anyone saying you didn't vote for Chipper Jones. And yet, if somebody else does that and feels strongly that I need to keep somebody else on the ballot, or this guy needs, I hate to use this term, my help getting in and withhold a vote from a great, great, great player for strategic purposes, I guess I can understand that. I would never do it, but that's at least one reason why 12 people didn't vote for Chipper Jones.
Tim Kurkjian right here with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds both got a higher percentage of the ballot this year than they did in 2017, but they still didn't make it. What do voting results for both suggest to you about their chances of ever getting in?
Well, they made another move forward, but it was a slightly smaller move than I expected it to be. Now, they've got 4 more years left on the ballot, and they basically have to get from the mid-50s to 75%. That is a big jump over a 4-year period, no matter who you are. And keep in mind, Edgar Martinez went from 58% to just over 70% this year in 1 year. So it can be done. But he doesn't have a connection to PEDs like Clemens and Bonds do. And that's the big separator. And a bunch of my writer friends just have made it clear, if you have a connection to PEDs, you are not getting my vote, period. And that's why the next 4 years should be real interesting to see if the slight softening we're seeing on this issue with Bonds and Clemens continues to soften at least a little bit, and maybe outside chance these guys get in on their 10th and final year on the ballot. It should be really interesting to watch.
My attitude with Barry Bonds is that he was a Hall of Famer before he became connected with PEDs. In the case of Clemens, I think he should be banned for stupidity because while the other guys were subpoenaed and ultimately, they were sitting, they were playing, but they were subpoenaed and provoked into giving testimony and things of that nature. Roger Clemens was somebody that had an opportunity to walk into the sun, and then felt the need to speak out once the Mitchell report came out, and I think opened his mouth too much and invited the heightened level of scrutiny that he received. What do you say to that about Roger Clemens, that thought process?
Well, to me, they're both together. I don't agree that you can separate the two. I think they're hand in hand here. And my thinking is, since I have voted for them every year that they're eligible, and that is not an easy decision for me to make, is, first off, I'm not comfortable being the moral arbiter here. And it also seems to me that during that time period, there was this tacit agreement in Major League Baseball that everybody, or a lot of people are doing this, nobody is checking it, nobody is testing, nobody is policing this, nobody's going to get caught, nobody's ever going to know. So I think, given the competitive nature of virtually every athlete I've ever met on this level, and that you've met, they would do anything that it takes to get an edge, win the game, be better, whatever it takes. Now, that doesn't mean that I condone any of this, and I'm all for somebody sticking a needle in their butt. I'm just saying, it seems to me that at that time, a whole lot of people were doing that, and baseball and everyone else allowed this to happen. So I think most competitive people would say, we're getting our butts kicked. Those guys over there, they're all cheating. We're going to try something else to try to keep up with them. And that is not the absolute worst thing that a great competitor could do, is say, I got to try this. I'm totally against it, but I think I understand to some degree what that era was like.
Tim Kurkjian right here with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. There's another era that we're venturing into right now, and it's about sports wagering. I'm sure you've read the stories about the NBA and its involvement now in helping to ultimately legalize gambling in the world of sports, particularly as it pertains to its product. Assuming that we move forward, because that clearly appears to be the case, how should we view Pete Rose? And more importantly, just as important to me, what has been your position on Pete Rose all of these years in terms of his omission from the Hall of Fame? Because I don't think that I ever spoke to you about that.
Right. Well, about 15 years ago, and not much has changed since then, frankly, I got asked on SportsCenter if Pete were on the ballot, would I vote for him? And with great hesitation, I said I would vote for him, because it seems to me all of his violations were as a player, as a manager, not as a player. And that's what I would be voting on him for, as a player. And I can't believe the blowback I got on that from some people who have been in the game a long time, to the point where I had one former player tell me, screaming at me, I can't believe you would vote for that guy if he did what we think he did, because that's the number one rule. You do not bet on baseball. He violated the number one rule. I had a scout friend, Stephen A., who told me if Pete Rose had killed a man, it would be less of a violation than what he did. I said, you've got to be kidding me. He said, Tim, you weren't around for the aftermath of the Black Sox scandal. If we're not sure whether the game's on the up and down, we're not sure if they're actually playing to win, then none of this means anything. The point of this, Stephen A., is there are people out there who are so opposed to what Pete Rose did that even if you put him on the writer's ballot, which is never going to happen, he's not getting in. The only way it's going to happen is if a commissioner comes along, pardons him, and helps get him in. But I don't see that happening anytime soon.
But even if sports wagering becomes in vogue and legalized in America as of right now, even if that happens, you still feel that people are going to maintain the same positions they've maintained about Pete Rose?
Well, that's a great question, Stephen A., and that's why, as little as I know about gambling, I've never placed a bet in my life on anything. I think you're right. I think it's possible with what the NBA is trying to do here that this could change all sorts of things. And yes, it could make people inside baseball, outside baseball now view things slightly differently about gambling in sports and everything else. And I just refuse to believe that Pete Rose would do anything as a player to affect the outcome of a game other than trying to win. And that's why, again, I have a little bit more sympathy than a lot of other people do for him.
Yeah, he's got the greatest nickname in the history of sports as far as I'm concerned. Charlie Hustle. Literally, you got a nickname and you're a star because of effort, because of hustle. I can't think of a better nickname than that. Very last question to you, Tim Kurkjian. Does Mariano Rivera have a chance to be the first guy to get 100% of the vote next year when he's eligible for the Hall of Fame?
No, he will not get 100% because, Stephen A., there are voters out there who honestly believe that relievers, even the greatest reliever of all time, does not belong in the Hall of Fame because relief pitching is not a real job. Now, I cannot tell you how much I disagree with that, okay? Look, I understand that throwing 1,100 innings in a career is a whole lot different than throwing 4,000 by a starting pitcher. Nobody understands that better than I do. But that is an important job today, the closer. And he did it better than anyone by a mile. So he has to be a Hall of Famer for me. And yet, I have friends of mine who vote who say, I'm never voting for a relief pitcher ever. And I just find that impossible to believe. But that's why Mariano Rivera will not get 100%. But he'll get close, because he was that great and that much better than the second best reliever.
Always great to talk to you, Tim. Really appreciate your time. Thank you, buddy.
Okay, Stephen A., see you.
Take it easy. The one and only Tim Kurkjian right here with Stephen A. on ESPN Radio. 888-729-3776. It's 888-SAY-ESPN. You heard me open up the show talking about Major League Baseball Hall of Famers Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens. You just heard Tim Kurkjian talking about that. You heard me talking about betting and the NBA, gambling, ultimately getting legalized eventually. It seems like it's about to happen. You heard Tim Kurkjian talk about that and how it could have a profound effect on Pete Rose and whether or not he ultimately gets inducted into the Hall of Fame, whether that should or shouldn't happen. I personally believe Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. I mean, we've got murderers and child molesters that have been forgiven more so than Pete Rose. It makes no sense to me. We get it. We understand the message. But especially in this day and age, considering how times are changing, maybe times should change officially for Pete Rose. I believe he should be inducted into the Hall of Fame because nothing could take away Charlie Hustle and what he delivered as a player. Plain and simple. All that and more up next. Keep listening. It's the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
ESPN Radio, presented by Progressive Insurance with more than 30 unique coverage options available. Progressive knows small business. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com. 888-729-3776 is always the number to call up. That's 888-SAY-ESPN. By the way, some news that y'all may not have heard. Vince McMahon, head of WWE, remember him? Apparently, he's trying to get a football league. Got an announcement coming up at 3 o'clock. He's going to have his own football league, an alternative to the NFL. As far as I'm concerned, if it's not during the NFL season, he's got a chance. I think this nation is drunk on football. No matter the dissipated ratings because of the protest with Colin Kaepernick, no matter all the other stuff that took away from the game itself, football's still king. Still king. And people want it even when the games ain't being played. You talking about football. And don't be surprised at all if football in the spring resonates. It'll be interesting. That's why I agree with the NFL. And when they turned down that ad and everybody was in an uproar a few days ago, support our veterans, an ad encouraging you to stand for the flag. NFL's not speaking against anything. What they're saying is we don't want to be involved in this stuff no more. We're just trying to focus on football. Because either way you slice it, you can't win. You got proponents of the flag led by President Donald Trump, who talks about red, white, and blue and honoring our country, blah, blah, blah. You got another side of folks that aren't against the flag, but were kneeling during the flag to bring attention to racial oppression, police brutality, inequality, et cetera, before they got the issue hijacked. And then they were willing to point to racist rhetoric within the flag. So as a result of that, if you're the NFL, how can you win? You can't win. You can't win unless you completely remove yourself from the entire equation and let the world know we just focused on football. That's all we're trying to do. We just trying to provide a good football product. That's how you get money from everybody. That's how you cement mass appeal. That's what you're after. Which is why I don't knock the NFL for that. And Vince McMahon with his XFL league and all of that stuff, that's just going to be another component of competition that the NFL has to pay attention to. Stay tuned. Let's go to the phones at 888-SAY-ESPN. Gary in New York, you're live with Stephen A. Talk to me, Gary. How are you?
Hey, Stephen A., how you doing? Big
I'm
fan.
good. Thank you for calling. Thank you. Go ahead.
And nobody speaks the truth in sports other than you, my brother.
Thank you, my brother. Go ahead, man.
Listen, this thing with the Hall of Fame, granted, these guys did what they did. It wasn't illegal until the league said it. So you go from that point from the league saying it's illegal and say anybody that got caught from here on, you're done. As far as Roger Clemens goes, I've never seen an idiot bigger than him. He was left alone. Nobody was worried about
bothering him, Gary.
Nobody
was bothering him. And he decided to open his mouth and speak up. I love the picture seeing his kids hug him, and I know they rooting for him and all that stuff. And he seems to have a wonderful family. God bless him. I hope he's living in peace and just enjoying the rest of his life. But he brought all of that upon himself and his family on his own. They were not bothering Roger Clemens the way they were bothering Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds and all of those guys. Roger Clemens did that to himself. They were not bothering him. They were not bothering him.
For somebody who only played once every 5 days, he should have kept his mouth shut.
I would think so, especially since he was retired by the time they brought his name up. I would think so. You're absolutely right. Appreciate the call, Gary. Thank you so much. Let's go to Jimmy in Indiana. You're live with Stephen A. What's up, Jimmy?
How you doing, Stephen A? Congratulations on going nationwide.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it.
I wanted to make, hey, no problem. I wanted to make a couple of comments and then throw out my question, and I'll hang up and listen to what you got to say.
Go ahead.
Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa should be in the Hall of Fame. But my question is, if you do, as you said, you did what you did on the field as a player, and as stupid as Roger Clemens was for doing what he did, he should go into the Hall of Fame for what he did as a player on the field.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I just refuse to acknowledge it. And because I'm disgusted with him for being that stupid and defiant. You know what I think about when I think about Roger Clemens? I think about Lance Armstrong. I think about somebody who was so defiant, knowing they were lying. And it was like, listen, in the case of Lance Armstrong, if you retire and go away, you're left alone. This idiot came back. And then he admitted to Oprah, had he never came back, they wouldn't have been there having that conversation where he's admitting publicly that he had been lying for years. This dude was suing people and ruining lives because they were telling the truth about him. He was willing to ruin lives to hide his lies. Now, I'm not going to go that far with Roger Clemens. I'm only saying that you're Roger Clemens. Nobody was bothering you. And by the way, I don't sit up there and bring up Mrs. Roger Clemens using steroids as a negative. You want to work yourself out and do it. Ain't nothing wrong with it. That's her business. So if the Clemens family hears me anywhere, I certainly don't mean to come across as casting any aspersions on her. She was trying to look as good as she could look and be in great shape. And damn it, from what I remember seeing, she pulled it off. Props to her. She wasn't the one out there throwing 95-mile-per-hour fastballs near people's head. She wasn't doing that. She wasn't flicking bats at Broken Bats at Mike Piazza while he was walking to first base in the World Series. She wasn't doing that. And she certainly isn't the one that opened her mouth to bring extra scrutiny and attention to herself when all she had to do was shut the hell up and go into retirement. She didn't do that. That was her husband, with who I assume to be are extraordinary kids. You got a wife, beautiful kids, beautiful family, and you so busy thinking about your damn ego that you're going to open your mouth and be all defiant and bring unwanted scrutiny your way. You did that to yourself. That's what Roger Clemens did. And by the way, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, I'm not sure they're Hall of Famers without the home runs. Because I don't recall them being that great in any other area. Barry Bonds was great without the home runs. Sosa and McGwire were great because of the home runs. And by the way, I know he's a colleague of mine, and I think he does a great, great job on the air. I'm very happy to have Alex Rodriguez as a part of the ESPN family. But we haven't forgotten his lies either. Just for the record. More of the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio in a minute.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it! A couple of folks want to talk about a little sports betting based on R.J. Bell's interview on the NBA getting themselves involved in sports betting. Let's go to Kevin in New York. You're live with Stephen A. Talk to me, Kev.
Stephen A., I think that the guy from Vegas was being a little disingenuous by when he made the comparison to going to the movies cost $15 and you could make that with $3 $5 bets. Gambling is a compulsion. Here are some numbers. I Googled it while I was on hold. 2.5 million compulsive gamblers, 3 million problem gamblers, 15 million at risk of becoming problem gamblers, and then you have 148 million that are low-risk gamblers. So you make gambling a little easier to do. You're creating a risk. I mean, these people lose everything.
Well, I agree with you there, but I agree with you there, Kev, but I have to ask you a question. Have you gambled before?
Sure.
All right. Have you been to a casino gambling before?
No. Casino gambling I do not like to do because I realized if I started doing it, I wouldn't be able to stop.
No. Don't be too literal with it. Here's what I mean. You've ever been to Vegas?
Twice.
Okay, if practically every hotel has a damn casino in it. So what I'm saying is, in other words, I don't mean like going traveling to a casino. You traveling to Atlantic City from New York. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about, hotel, and you got an hour or two to play with, and you were probably gonna go eat, or you were probably gonna go do something else, and then you said, you know what? I got $100 or $200 to lose, worst case scenario. I'd blow it anyway. Let me go to the blackjack table. That never happens.
I've seen it happen. The reason I don't do it, and this is not, I'm not some saint, but I know that I wouldn't be able to stop there. But what I picture is you're making it legal. You're not going to have to go to a casino. Someone at work will be like, all right, listen, I'll bet $10 this guy hits his next free throw.
Hey, Kevin, they're trying to get you. They're trying to get you to be able to do it on the kiosk. They're trying to get you to be able to do it on your smartphone or your tablets, like the iPad and stuff like that. They're trying to get all that going on. So you're right.
Free throw. I'll bet $5 he misses the next free throw. That's what your friend was saying. So then the guy hits the free throw and you're down 5. So you know what? Instantly, and this is the gambling mentality, you go, all right, you know what? Let me make that money back. I'll say that on the next play, nobody hits a three-pointer, and I get 2-1 odds on that, so I'll bet $5. And then you get unlucky and someone drills a 3. The next thing you know, like after 4 or 5 minutes, it doesn't stop at one. Well,
I understand it, but Kevin, you're still not answering the bigger question. How is that the league's problem? Because remember, all of that kind of stuff is going to keep the viewer ingratiated with their product. That means more eyeballs, more continuous. Like, for example, in the world of television, there's a category to sort of analyze what your viewing audience is doing, right? And you know what that category is, Kevin? Time spent watching. Some shows have 16, 18 minutes. Shows like First Take have 40. So time spent watching. Whereas, so if you get people to want to watch longer, That facilitates better ratings. It brings in more ad revenue because the advertisers know that people are spending more time watching. Not to mention the fact that it's more money for the networks, and ultimately it ends up being more money for the leagues, not only because they're getting a piece of the pie for the gamblers, but they're also getting a bigger piece of the television pie because they're charging networks more to have their product aired on their stations, on their network. So you could see how much money is involved. The bottom line is this: as morally as you sound, as morally upstanding as you sound, are you throwing away the potential at all of those dollars because of it? Yes or no?
But I don't have the power in my hand.
That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking you. So I know you don't have the power. I'm just asking you. You called up to the show, and I'm asking you to let me know what your stance is. How would you feel if you were in a position to shun it or to embrace it because of the exorbitant amount of dollars available? What would be your call?
Well, you probably will think that I have the luxury of saying this because it's an impossibility.
Good
but
Lord, man.
But at some point, you have to measure the amount of money you need to have compared with the cost.
Now, Kevin, how hard was it to answer that question? You're not on national television. Everybody doesn't see you. We don't know your address. I asked you a simple question. You're couching it. You damn near sound like Max Kellerman. You're hedging. I mean, you're just sort of apologizing before giving your answer. You just had to answer the question. I have no problem with your answer, and I appreciate the call. Thank you. More of the Stephen A. Smith Show. To end the show in a minute, you're listening live to Stephen A. on ESPN Radio.
Guess what? You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it! Back to the phones we go right here on the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio. Before I get on out of here, let's pass it off. Let's go to Larry in L.A. You're live with Stephen A. Talk to me.
Stephen A. Hello, once again. I'm in Los Angeles. The PED issue. That was not even an issue up until very
Pull back from your phone because you're coming across as a bit muffled. I think you're a little bit too close to your phone. Pull your lips back from your phone just a touch. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. The issue of PEDs in Major League Baseball, there was no PED testing in Major League Baseball. Never made it an issue until Barry Bonds broke the all-time record. Hank Aaron threatened for his life when he broke Babe Ruth's record. Cocaine was not even a contraband during Babe Ruth's era.
Larry, I got to put you on hold. Your signal's so bad, my listeners can't understand you. Your cell phone signal has broken up, but I think I got what you were saying, that they didn't start testing until Barry Bonds started smacking those home runs. Then all of a sudden it became a heightened issue. Maybe you're right, but at the end of the day, they still had Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa and Rafael Palmeiro on Capitol Hill. That much cannot be ignored. And then A-Rod admitted in 2009 to Peter Gammons that he had used steroids when he was with Texas, even though he later got busted for using some when he was with the Yankees. So all of this stuff is stuff that can't be ignored. But Larry, let's talk tomorrow when we got a clearer signal and more time. Mike in Michigan, you're live with Stephen A. Talk to me real quick, Mike. Go ahead.
Hey, Stephen A., just a few things about Michigan State. You walk a fine line when you talk about the death penalty because it deals with the students, which really had nothing to do with this. I agree with you. Man, they need to clean house, get rid of the president. They need to get rid of the board that allowed that president to stick around. I don't know if you heard this gentleman Ferguson and the things that he said that was on that board that were just totally inappropriate for what was going on there. Beyond that, the dean of doctors and so forth, all of those people need to go, and as far as I'm concerned, they can all be brought up on charges.
Well, so do I. I agree with you there, and I co-sign with that. I'm just saying, I'm alerting you. There are people walking around talking about death penalty, but I do think you're right because that affects the student and that affects a lot of innocent folks. I think this is when you look at Jerry Sandusky, if you're talking about the death penalty for Penn State, the reason why I was a proponent of that is because he used the football program to recruit young boys he was molested. And Joe Paterno, as far as I'm concerned, could have done and would have done a hell of a lot more had he gotten some word that Ohio State was cheating against him. But because of that didn't happen. And so I look at that a little bit differently than I look at what transpired at Michigan State. But this was so egregious. Heads need to roll. And I don't think civil cases against Michigan State is enough. I think there are a few other people there that might deserve to be thrown in jail. But we'll talk about that more tomorrow when I have more time, Mike. Thank you so much. Let's go to Eric in Connecticut. You're live with Stephen A. Real quick. Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, Stephen A. How are you, man? I just want to talk about the XFL. I mean, I don't understand what on earth Vince McMahon is thinking. This is already a failed entity. We already saw this 7-8 years ago. I mean, everybody watched the first game, but nobody watched anything else, and that's why it failed. I mean, right? We don't get excited for arena football games when they come on Friday and Saturdays. Like, oh man, I'm so excited for the arena football game.
But they still exist. They still exist, and apparently they consider themselves a product that seems to be growing. And I think what you have is a situation where people are smart enough to know they can't compete with the NFL. But I also think that you're looking for folks that what you're seeing is folks trying to come up with an idea of a pseudo minor league system for NFL players as opposed to just relying on college football. I think that's what you're getting with the Vince McMahons and others of the world, Eric. I think that's what they're after.
Did you ever go to a Hartford? I don't even remember what they were. Hartford.
I never did, but I did go to an arena football game in Philadelphia.
Exactly, But, you know, okay, there's millions of people there. For what the Arena Football League, talking about them for a second, is trying to do is they're trying to bring up in the smaller markets this Arena Football League, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I mean, Hartford, right? Everybody goes in the city and Hartford to work, and then they leave.
Well, Eric, we'll find out. I mean, if it won't work, we'll find out quick, fast, and in a hurry. So call me back once we have evidence. Appreciate the call. Paul in Miami, you're live with Stephen A. Real quick. Go ahead, Paul.
Stephen A., how you doing, man?
All right. Real quick, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you think Pat Riley has any more moves for the Heat this season. By the way, South Beach, we gave you the key to the city. We miss you. Come on back.
Well, listen, I might come on back because the Miami Heat are the sleeper team that I thought they were. They lost the other night, but they've been playing good basketball. Eric Spoelstra can really coach. You know how I feel about Pat Riley and the organization, and I'm rooting for Miami to be relevant. I think that other than the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Miami Heat can go in against anybody and make it a series, and who knows what they'll do, but we'll have to wait and see. Let's go to Chris in Charlotte real quick. You're live with Stephen A. Go ahead, Chris.
Hey, Stephen A., thanks for taking my call. I heard you talking about Pete Rose earlier, and whenever I hear the question about whether Pete Rose belongs in the Hall of Fame, I get kind of amused because I think we've been looking at this argument from the completely wrong perspective, especially when you look at the steroid guys. I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is, does Pete Rose belong on the Hall of Fame ballot? If he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, let the writers show me. I can't take them seriously when they keep talking about that rule that keeps him off the ballot when he was never actually found guilty of doing anything as a player.
But here's what hold it. Here's the reality. The Baseball Writers Association of America, you know, they consider themselves the moral authority and the moral overseers of the sport. And their attitude is that Pete Rose committed the ultimate crime against the game, and he can never be forgiven. And so when you present it like in that fashion, that's just not good enough. What happens is that there's no questioning whether or not Pete Rose deserves to be a Hall of Famer based on his on-field exploits. There's no one that could debate that about the all-time hits leader. Nobody. He clearly deserves it. So him being left out is because of his transgressions. And that's about morals. That's not about baseball. And the moral authority, which is the Baseball Writers Association of America, is saying we want no parts of him. And neither do other Hall of Famers. Simple. Talk to y'all in 22 hours. Until then, peace and love.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.